on BBC Local Radio in Shropshire, North Staffordshire, South Cheshire and the West Midlands. We present Mike Adams and Chris Savory, the record collectors, from now until 9 tonight.
With you in the Midlands, BBC Radio.
Well, there you are, This Little Girl of Mine. That's the second track we've played by DION tonight on our Record Collectors programme. And I'm very privileged to say, over in the United States there, hello DION, how are you?
Hey, how you doing over there?
We're doing fine, DION, and it's a privilege to talk to you. And I must kick off straight away and ask, for the benefit of our listeners, how did DION and the Belmonts originally get together?
Well, we were... there was a record company that I auditioned for, and they really loved what I was doing. I went down there with a guitar and a friend, and I sang some stuff for them. They were a new company that opened up, and a songwriter knew about them and brought me down, and they loved it, and they signed me. And they kind of put me, they were trying to, in fact, I did a record, an existing record with them, an existing track that I was kind of like, was so out of my backyard, you know. I said, listen, let me go back to my neighborhood, and if you want to hear voices, you know, let me gather up some of the street corner singers from the Bronx, Bronx, New York, and in my neighborhood. And so I went up and I gathered a couple of guys up there and from different neighborhoods, and brought them down to Laurie Records. We were kids. I was about 17, and they were about the same age, give or take. And we rehearsed, you know, in my little room. I was living with my parents, and we took the train downtown and rehearsed on the train. And when we got there, we had I Wonder Why, worked out. And that was the beginning of DION and the Belmonts. We named ourselves right at the company. You know, we thought of cars, but there were the Cadillacs and the Eldorados. And then we started thinking of the birds, you know, like the flamingo. and people, the moon glows, and then we decided to name ourselves after a street.
Right, now, because that was going to be my next question, how did we get the Belmonts? But what I will ask you then, DION, is...
Well, two of the guys lived on Belmont Avenue in the Bronx.
Right. Now, did those other guys, were they actually in what I call established street corner groups, or were they just like, as you said, just singing on corners you'd heard them before?
Yeah, we were loosely... no, there was no... It was the beginning of rock and roll, and there weren't a lot of established... In fact, there was a friend of mine who mailed me recently 2 boxes of CDs of early groups that recorded. And, you know, I don't know where I lived or what I was aware of, but I was not aware that there were so many groups out recording that never made it. I just never was aware of it.
We seem to...
I was aware of everybody who was, like my friends, the Crest at the time from New York, and then I did a show with the Skyliners, Jimmy Beaumont. These are the people I wasn't aware of. People who were struggling, who didn't make it. I just wasn't aware, because I got hurled into this other, dimension.
Can I ask you, DION, about your early recording career? I mean, are you very aware of the different releases you've had out? Because I was looking at my big discographies on things like I Wonder Why, and I noticed Laurie put them out on various different coloured labels, and they're all worth something like $50 to $60 each already.
No, I didn't know they were put out on... I remember seeing some different labels, but no, I'm not too aware of all that.
There was one I wanted to ask you about. I know it's slightly later, slipping up to something like 1961. Can you remember Runaround Sue actually being released in coloured vinyl?
No.
Because I was looking and finding out that that's going for something like $500 to $600 at the moment. Do you have all copies?
Not aware of that at all. I never even saw one.
Oh, because I was going to say, do you have copies of all your recordings?
Not really originals, re-releases and stuff, but no, not really.
Hi, Dion. This is Mike. I'm the other half of the duo. And just say I've been a fan of yours since I was in short trousers back in 1912. And it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. And especially you have a fan that works with us, as you may know already. So we've been playing your records on this program for about 18 years. So you've been consistently in our thoughts, and certainly the British public have a great affection for you. So we're very pleased to welcome you.
Oh, well, thank you. You make me feel good.
Well, I can tell you a lot of people do think that way. A couple of questions. The one in particular that you will be associated with the Buddy Holly tour for many people. Did you know Buddy Holly well personally?
Well, I knew him because he moved to New York.
Yeah.
And in fact, my mother cooked him some spaghetti at the house one night, and I just from traveling with him on that tour.
Yes.
And just for the little the times that I was with him, we. Especially on a tour, we got close because you're traveling for miles, and you throw a blanket over each other because we were freezing on that little school bus. It wasn't a country music custom Golden Eagle liner. So that we would throw a blanket over, and we would tell stories to each other. And I would tell Buddy stories about the Bronx. Where I come from, and he would talk about Lubbock, Texas, which was interesting. And I used to say, Buddy, there's a bunch of characters in my neighborhood, like Frankie Yunk Yunk and Joe BB Eyes and Ralphie Moach. And I said, Buddy, we have a guy in my neighborhood, we call him Shakespeare. Because he says, to be or not to be, which is my apartment?
I like that.
And Buddy Holly never got that joke.
Oh. No.
They didn't have apartments in Lubbock, Texas.
No.
They had like screen doors, but they didn't. Back in the 50s, they didn't. He didn't get it, and he looked at me like, "What the hell is he talking about?"
There's a movie which is one of my favorite movies, and they're making a remake of it at the moment. And every time I watch this film, I actually know the script now, I always think that Donna the Prima Donna or one of your tracks should be in it. But it was a movie called Analyze This.
Right. Well, I have some friends in that movie.
Yeah, I thought you might have actually. But it's one of my favorite films. I always thought there should have been a track of yours in there. But just going back to your beginning of your career, a lot of your records were covered by artists around the world. What were your feelings when British artists and Australian artists and people anywhere actually in the English-speaking world, were covering things like A Teenager in Love and I Wonder Why and so forth? What were your feelings when you were being copied?
Well, I remember somebody doing Teenager in Love. I forget who. And he had a hit in England, I think.
Marty Wilde.
Marty Wilde.
Yeah, and there was a guy in France. When I went to France, I had gone to. I was the first rock and roll artist signed to Columbia Records, which is now Sony, and they put me on tour. And they sent us through England, through France, through Spain, and Italy. And when I got to France, there was a guy. And I forget his name. It could be Michael Anthony or Anthony Michael.
Richard Anthony.
Richard Anthony and Johnny Halliday.
What's his name?
The Richard Anthony.
Richard Anthony.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Richard Anthony had covered a lot of my records, and they were introducing me to everybody as Richard Anthony's writer. I was used to being a rock and roller in the States, and it was like it kind of felt good, in a way. I was kind of walking around going, I'm Richard Anthony's writer,
You did you ever find out who the backing group was on Mohawk Records? Who was the backing?
That's what I was talking about when we first began this conversation. I was signed to Laurie Records, or Mohawk Records.
Mohawk.
I'm just trying to simplify it. And they had these two existing tracks that a great arranger of those times of that era did. His name was Hugo Montenegro.
Yes, very famous.
Called The Chosen Few and Out in Colorado.
Good, Bad, and the Ugly.
They begged me to sing on these things because there was an existing singer on these tracks called Joe Allegro, and they took him off and they said, we want a young person to, sing this song. So, I said, I don't know about this. This is like out of my backyard. I don't even know what this is about because, they had a guy, they had a group called the Timberlanes, sang on these tracks, and they were like from Colorado or Oklahoma, and they were guys in plaid shirts at that time, and they were like, do 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 do, and I said, what is that? It was so out of my range, and that's when I said I told the guys that owned the company, let me go back to my neighborhood. If you want to hear some rock and roll, let me gather some guys up, the best of the street corner doo-wop singers that I know, and I'll bring some guys down here and we'll do something. I'll show you what it really supposed to sound like,
Why do you think, in New York, which I've only been to New York once, but it's a much-loved city here in England, but why do you think there was this tremendous ability on street corners for 3 or 4 guys to get together and just make fantastic music? Where did it happen?
Well, you always have this kind of stuff. You have this show business thing going on where people kind of formalize things, and then all of a sudden you have an honest breakout of expression, usually on the streets, and then it gets formulated again, and very systemized from businessmen, and then all of a sudden it breaks out again like it did with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones or Bob Dylan here. He kind of brought thinking in single-handedly, and then it gets formalized again into the disco thing, and then you have the punk rock groups like the Ramones and all the punk rock groups saying, we won't take it, and they just break out with this kind of street music, and then it gets formalized again. Then you have the rappers,
exactly.
So you always have this kind of real expression coming out of some people that if you could, what I'm saying.
Before the corporations take control.
Right.
Yeah. Dion, can I ask you a little bit about you and the Belmonts? Eventually, at one point, you went one way, the Belmonts went the other way. And am I right in thinking that you had another group, shall we say, called the Belmonts, but were they not the Del Satins?
Yeah, what happened was after doing I Wonder Why and Teenager in Love and Where or When, when we did Where or When, I did it for the president of the company. It was his favorite song, and we had somebody show us some harmonies that we weren't aware of. So after that, the Belmonts kind of wanted to sing everything like that.
Right.
And I got kind of pushed into this album called Wish Upon a Star, and there was a lot of kind of very smooth kind of harmonies and old classics, and it just drove me nuts because to me that was my father's music, and rock and rollers at the time were like breaking that show business tradition. It was it was teenage music. There was
Yes.
no such thing as teenage music.
Swinging on a Star and things like that. It was.
Yeah. So I said, I'm out of here. I can't go here. You know, you're bringing me back to the Timberlanes here. You know, that's not what this is about for me. So I cut myself loose and I started. I just said, you know, because the Belmonts and I had separate contracts. I had gotten signed first, and then I brought them down, got them signed, and when you know, I just said, because we really were like, it was like two different groups, you know, two different entities, but we were, there was a third entity called DION and the Belmonts.
Yes.
So I just split. I said, you know, I want to rock out a little. You know, I got some ideas. So I started doing stuff, and I got this group. Being, you know, I was doing so well with male voices from the streets. I got a group from Brooklyn called the Del Satins.
Oh yes.
And I had more hits with the Del Satins than I had with the Belmonts.
What was the first record you did with them? Was that?
I think I did.
Wasn't Having Fun, was it? Was it Run Around Sue or?
I'm not sure, but I think it was that whole album that well.
Little Diana, Lovers Who Wander.
Yeah, I might have done like Born to Cry.
Yes.
And Little Diane, and you know, I was giving them parts. They thought I was nuts, but you know, Run Around Sue, The Wanderer, all those things were kind of done on one album. You know, so. You know, they were a great group. They had a great sound.
Yeah, they were brilliant.
And the Belmonts were wonderful. There was like, you know, Angelo, the tenor in the Belmonts, was just, he had perfect pitch and he had a beautiful voice. And Carlo was a very different kind of doo-wop, you know, bass singer, because he wouldn't follow anybody. So he'd do innovative parts that were just as innovative as Chuck Berry's Johnny B. Good on guitar, you know, as far as I was concerned. So the Belmonts had a real, you know, like, just, they were, to me, they were terrific. It was, you know, it was like great singing with them. But then they wanted to take off on this classic kind of traditional road, and I just couldn't go there, so we decided to split. And when I got to Del Satins, when I found them, we had some groups come up and audition. I really liked, but they were from the street. They didn't know anything about this traditional stuff. And and we just had a good time making records, you know.
Can I ask you a little bit about one or two of your Columbia records? Something that's always intrigued me to ask. One of my favorite records is quite a slow one. It's called The Road I'm On, in brackets, Gloria. And I've always been intrigued as to whether you know or not, who played the harmonica on it? Was it you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did play the harp on it. Yeah.
Right. Can I ask a follow-up question to that, Dion, is what instruments do you actually play?
Well, a lot of people don't know how well I play guitar.
Mm-hmm.
I really like. There's an album out that Ace Records put out in England called Deja Nu.
Yes. Yep.
There's a song on there that I wrote. It's called. I play guitar and everything, but I just never, you know, visually took, because I was singing with these guys. It just didn't look right to have a guitar and have three guys next to you for some reason, you know. So I decided to put the guitar down. But I played on everything, and but you could hear like my guitar playing on this song called "Hug My Radiator."
Yep.
It was written. I was writing it actually when I was on the bus with Buddy Holly, and I'd have everybody sing different verses and kind of had some fun. Then I completed it. I never really finished it or decided to record it, but years later, I decided it kind of, I put it together. I said, I'm going to put that song out. It's called I'm going to Hug My Radiator. I don't know what you call a radiator in English.
Yes,
Radiator.
that's the same thing. Yeah.
Okay. Hug my radiator when I hit my hotel room. we were traveling through the Midwest, and it was
Freezing.
very cold, and so I put this song together. But I completed it, and I do some guitar solos on that, and you could. But I play real good blues guitar, and you know, I could sit in a coffee house and do a 2-hour set easily.
Well, one of the things I was going to ask you about your early days, because your music, I was kind of raised on in Merseyside, very near Liverpool, and certainly a lot of your tracks were by a young group called the Beatles, where actually either played by them or they were played to them. So I know the Beatles were well acquainted with your music. I'm sure you know that anyway. But I just wondered, you know, did any of the idols
Well,
that...
I did meet the Beatles in Manhattan one time when they came to do the Ed Sullivan Show.
Right.
And I was living on 57th Street, and I ran into John Lennon and Ringo, and he did tell me that they did Ruby Baby.
They did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I never heard it, but you know, it was like, yeah, they were like fans of Carl Perkins, and you know, we had this, and they were really inspired by all the, you know, the roots. They really picked up on the stuff that started me out. You know, that's what's funny. They didn't. They were picking up. They were going further back than.
Right to root.
Yeah, it was. You know, to me, England really, the English really picked up on the essence of it. You know, that's where. That's. I wasn't even there until I started. When I went to Columbia, I heard Robert Johnson.
Yes.
And some of you know real 30s and 40s blues artists, and I started understanding where a lot of it.
Well, before we get on to your sort of middle 60s period, which in fact you did draw like Johnny B. Good and all the Chicago blues and Hoochie Coochie Man and so on, but did you ever get to meet, you know, you met Buddy Holly, but did you get to meet Eddie Cochran or Elvis Presley?
Yeah, I worked with Eddie Cochran at the Palace Theater in New York. He was something. He was really something, that guy. I mean, look what he did in a short lifetime. This he was doing, man. He rocked, you know. And it was it was fun being with him. He was different.
Talk about being different, Dion. You worked with Phil Spector as well, didn't you, in the 70s?
Yeah, well, I knew Phil Spector, you know, as a producer. Back when I started, we were kind of fans of each other's, and you know, he was great. I mean, his records, you always looked forward to that new Phil Spector record that was coming out, you know, and or the Crystals, whoever he cut, you know, they were always exciting to listen to, you know. So I was kind of a fan of the music, and yet I was right in the middle of it, you know. So that was a lot of fun, you know.
One of my favorite records is Donna the Prima Donna, which you did in Italian, which was
Right.
Yeah, pardon?
I tried to do it.
Oh, come on. And the other thing is you did a great Christmas album in 1993, and I think that was your first Christmas album. I could be wrong.
Yes, no, it was.
Yeah, I mean, why didn't you do one before? Because that was a good album.
I don't know. I grew up singing all these songs and listening to all these songs, and I thought, well, you know, I'd like to. I went in. I had a little band at the time. I don't know exactly. Was it the early '90s? Maybe. I'm not sure. And went into a studio down here, like in March, and all the wives put up, and the girlfriends put up trees and trinkets all over the studio, and we just did all these songs that we grew up with, you know.
Right.
And you know, we take a different spin on it. I get something going, and we just do it, you know. In fact, I think Santa Claus is Coming to Town. I never even mixed it. It was so done so spontaneous.
It was just
left it
just on the button without one.
Yeah.
Now, just a quickie here, but You actually worked with Paul Simon, was it written on the subway wall and little? I'm trying to remember the tracks now. Did you know Paul Simon before you did the track written on the subway wall?
He's from New York.
Yes.
And
He was with the Mystics, wasn't he?
Yes.
you know, he was around at that time and into all the. He was a New York, you know, a fan of New York music.
Yes.
Grew up in New York and had that borough mentality, whether you're from Queens or Brooklyn or the Bronx, you know, or Manhattan. There was kind of this mentality, you know, and so he was a fan of the early groups. In fact, he sang in a lot of them. So when I asked him to layer his voice, he did on this record written on the subway wall. He layered 5 voices. He sang that old classic "Little Star" by the Elegants.
Oh yes.
That I inserted in the middle of this song, and he actually layered 5 voices, so you could hear his kind of you know, the depth of his harmonizing and what he digested as a youngster with all those New York groups, because he did all the voices on it. I didn't even sing it with him. He wanted to try something. I says, go. And he did it.
Almost a conclusion is, what's going to take to get you to come to the UK? Because we'd love to see you performing live here in the UK.
You know, I'd love to do that. I was talking to Gene Pitney recently, and he said, Dion, why don't we go over together?
Yes.
You know, I just don't get... I love England. I don't know why. I was never... I just maybe didn't get asked, or I don't know, but... don't know.
Well, Gene's over here he's almost an Englishman now. He's over here so often, and he plays to packed houses everywhere. We certainly would.
Well,
I could tell you'd sell out.
Put these shows together to, you know, give us a call.
Well, I will. In fact,
I sing better than ever.
Well, I know you spoke
You know,
to.
I really enjoy people and I enjoy music, so.
Well,
It would be a lot of fun.
With your permission, I'll ask where Trevor's got your number. What I will do is I'll pass it on to a promoter in the UK. We'd love for you to come here, that's for sure. Very quickly, so we got so many people actually who are ringing us up about you because you're that popular. But you did work with Freddie Cannon as well, didn't you? Freddie Bang Bang Cannon.
Freddie Boom Boom Cannon.
Boom Boom Cannon, sorry.
I was talking, and somebody mentioned him the other day. I don't know what happened to him or where he is. I lost touch.
He didn't tour Britain for 30 years, and I was thinking Bang Out album, but Boom Boom, of course. And Freddie was in Britain last year, virtually sold out in the whole of the UK.
Really?
Yeah. Phenomenal. A really, really, really good act, and he's back in the US now.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Very interesting.
Dion, I'm aware very much that...
I did come over at one time with Del Shannon and had a great time. Had a great time with him and Timmy Euro.
Yeah.
And I worked with, at that time, years ago, with Joe Brown, who was...
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Who was real interesting, really energetic performer. He was great, man. We had a good time.
Yes, we've had a good time tonight as well, Dion, but I'm aware that the clock is beating us now, so I'm going to go out and play that record I talked about earlier on, The Road I'm On. But if you stay on the line, I think Trevor wants to just get back and have a quick word with you. So on behalf of everyone on your favourite BBC radio station, Dion, thank you very much for taking the time out.
Thank you so much.
Mike, God bless you guys.
You too. Thanks for the music, Dion.
Thank you. God bless.
And you.
Well, believe it or not, listeners, it took us 2 years, or it's taken us 2 years to get hold of Dion. And do you know something? We were sweating right to the last second then, because I put the first Dion track on because that was the time, There was no answer, and I thought, no. And then I got the message, he's just walked through the front door. But Mike, you got a little record there. Oh, by the way, those two records I played, Gloria, or the Rhodamont Gloria, and then the good old blues standard, both done by Dion there, those. That was Spoonful. Mike, what have you got to take us up?
Rhodamont was written by Dion, and Spoonful was Woody Dixon, of course. It's 6 minutes to 8 o'clock on your favourite radio station with Mike Adams and Chris Savory.